Evening, everybody. So I'd like to introduce to you our speaker tonight, Ken Glass, proprietor of the Brattle Bookshop in Boston, and it's been in business since 1825. And the family has run it. Ken's family has run it since 1949. And Ken started working there full-time in 1973, although he started part-time at age 5 years old. And his first word is rumored to be book. Ken has been the president of the Antiquarian Booksellers Association, the New England chapter. He's a frequent presence on national television, and he's written numerous articles on book selling, appraising, and collecting. And I give to you Ken Glass.
Thank you very much, and thank you for showing up, and whoever is watching and listening. And it's always interesting with Zoom meetings. There are people out there, but you don't know. But it really, especially when you've just had snowstorms, or it's really nice. So welcome, everybody. What I do in a talk, the talk will last about an hour. The first half hour or so, I will basically give some of my history. I'll tell some stories of places I've been, talk about some of the collections, rare books, a little bit about Antiques Roadshow, how that all works, which I hope you all watch, because the more people who watch it, the better the ratings, the more they keep doing it, and it's a lot of fun, so I want to keep doing it. And then what I'll do for the next 10, 15 minutes is question and answer. I can go on and on and on and on about old books, and at least with question and answer, I can go on about what you want to listen to. The last couple of minutes of the talk, I'll tell a couple of more stories, and that's basically what I do, is tell stories about books, book collecting people, and so on. I'll end the formal part of the talk, and then the people who are here, then I'll quickly do any and all appraisals. I do it very quickly. My wife says now that I'm getting a little older, I only work half a day. I get in at 5:30 in the morning. The store closes at 5:30. That's 12 hours. That's half a day. And when I'm doing talks like this, it goes even a little longer, but I like to get home. People who aren't here, though, all day long at the store, people are either calling, sending emails, pictures, getting in touch, and we do appraisals. So if you don't get everything done here tonight, we're always happy to do it. And a lot of and also, if you like the stories, I do a podcast. I have about 100-something episodes. They're about 20 minutes long, called Brattlecast, and that's on Apple and all of the things you can get it. They're all about 20 minutes, and I just tell stories. And a lot of the fun of the store, again, is the people you meet, the unusual circumstances, what happens. And let me give you a little bit of background. The history of the store does go back to the 1820s, but for all practical purposes, it was going out of business in 1949. My father was getting married. My mother had $500. With that, they bought half interest in the Brattle Bookshop. And it's always been in Boston. People call us. Matter of fact, someone did today. They were in Harvard Square on Brattle Street. Where are you? We tell them we're downtown. And essentially, when my father started the store, there was a little small street in what was Scully Square in Boston called Brattle Street. And to make it even more confusing, the street doesn't exist anymore. It's where Boston City Hall Plaza is. And my father built the store in his great love of books, his hard work, his knowledge, and he was also a bit of a character and a showman. And we've had 7 different locations over the years, mainly due to urban renewal. But every time he'd move, when it was a planned move, he'd move the best books over to the new shop and then run sales, half-price dollar, 50-cent, quarter, dime. Last day of the sale, though, everything was free. And he would literally have hundreds of people line up with bags, packs, satchels, whatever. Ring a big bell, they go charging into the store, grab whatever they could grab. 5 minutes later, he'd ring the bell again. That group would leave. The next group would come in. And he gave away over 250,000 books that way. Now, the last time he did this was in 1969, And we were moving from the end of Washington Street near Boston City Hall to West Street, where we are now. And at the end of the giveaway, there were books left over. And like I said, my father was a bit of a character and a showman. And if you can sort of picture this, he hired a covered wagon with a cowboy and a horse team, and on the cover of the covered wagon, it said, "Go West, book lovers, go 5 West Street, Brattle Bookshop." They filled it up with books, and they drove it, again, from near Boston City Hall, up Washington Street, up Court Street, down Tremont by the Boston Common to where West Street is, and then back down Washington Street with my father sitting in back, throwing books out the whole way. Now, the superintendent in charge of traffic was a friend of his, told him he could do it all morning. But within an hour, the city was in an absolute standstill. They told him to stop. He didn't care. He'd gotten his point across. And when we first moved on to West Street, we were in a 5-story, 150-year-old wooden building, absolutely crammed full of books. In February of 1980, I got a call at 4 o'clock in the morning. The building was on fire, and it literally burnt to the ground. I mean, it was 100% gone, and we essentially had no insurance. We didn't even have enough insurance to cover the demolition of the building. But we wanted to keep going, not go out of business. We found a storefront a few doors down the street. We rented folding tables. People either sold, gave us, donated books. Kevin White, who was the mayor at the time, came down with a carload of books. And within a month, we reopened. It was a meager stock, but the main thing was just keep going. The next 4 years, we slowly but surely rebuilt the stock. 4 years after that, we bought the building that we're in now, which is, again, a few doors down on West Street, and sort of the old Dickensian type of store. Outside stands at $1, 3 and 5, 2 floors of general used books, and then a 3rd floor with rare books, autographs, manuscripts, leather bindings, and so on. And that type of business, the large, old, general, secondhand bookstore, especially in the inner cities, is a dying business. And it's not dying because people don't like books, buy books, sell books, read books. But in the inner cities in particular, property value has gone so high, that rents has gone so high, that old bookstores, which I can assure you are not the most efficiently run businesses in the world, one right after the other have been going out of business. Now, like I say, we bought our building in the early 80s, so I hope to do this for years to come. I have daughters who are in their late 30s. I don't think they have any interest in coming into the business the way I did, and I've done this just about literally all my life. My parents did say my first word was book. I don't know, maybe it was, but I'm sure they were talking about them all the time. And I worked after school in elementary, junior high school, summers during college. I actually have a degree in chemistry from the University of Massachusetts. I was going to get a doctoral degree at the University of Wisconsin, but in 1973, I needed a year off. My father's health wasn't that good. That year now is a little over 50 years, and I don't regret for a minute that I'm doing this and not in a laboratory somewhere. And one of the really fun parts about the business is going out to houses and estates. That's how we get most of our books. It's almost like being Jim Hawkins on Treasure Island, every day never knowing what you're going to see, the people, the places, the characters. And I'll give you a few of those stories, and then I'll tell more stories. But and sometimes the characters are not only just the people that come in and buy books, but even some of the employees. There was one employee I remember in particular, and this was just after I started working at the store, and I had hired a new employee. He had worked there a day or two. He was there, and an older man came in. Now, that older man might not be older than I am now, but an older man came in, and he was looking for an author called Doniford Yates, a somewhat obscure novelist. I knew who it was. We went over to the section, didn't have any of the things. I said to the man, would you like to leave your name? Because at the time we had index cards to keep track of everything. He said, no, I'll check again later, and he left. And my new employee comes up to me and says, does that man come in here often? And I said, you know, I really wasn't paying that much attention. I was looking for the book. He says, oh, well, that was J.D. Salinger. I used to date his daughter. And now this same employee has one of the most memorable introductions that I've ever had. The fact that even 50 years later, I'm doing that. Now, my wife likes to say, the way she puts it is that she worked for the Boston local professional basketball team for a number of years. Well, anyways, we had 4 tickets to a Celtics game. And we said, Hugh, do you want to go to the game? We've got a couple of extra tickets. And he said, sure, but I'll meet you. Give me the 2 tickets. I'll meet you there. We get there. He's sitting there with a woman. And he goes, I'd like you to meet my wife, Mickey. We're getting divorced tomorrow. What do you say to an introduction like that? Anyways, and he worked for us for about 15 years, and nothing ever changed. It was always like that. But going out to houses, I was out of the store. I got back at one time, and I had a message that a Mrs. Fisher had called and had some books. I called her up, and she said, yes, I have 500. My father had 500 art reference books. He died. We want to get the best price we can. We're inviting a number of dealers down to bid on them. Would you be interested? 500 art reference books sounded like an interesting library. They lived in Providence, and Providence is only an hour away. I mean, we drive all over New England, all over the Northeast, sometimes even all over the country. So an hour away really isn't anything that much at all. They lived in an old street called Benefited Street up near Brown University. We got to the house. It was a large old colonial house. I got led through the house into a courtyard, into a garage. Second floor of the garage, they had 5,000 books. Well, it turned out her married name was Fisher. Her father's name was John Nicholas Brown. Family founded Brown University, one of the wealthier families in the country. And after about 6 months, I bought 80% of the books I wanted, and she was pleased, and I was happy. And she said, my mother has a lot of books. Most are being given to the university. Some are being sold at auction, but would you like to go to Newport to take a look at the books there? Well, their house in Newport is one of the mansions on the ocean. I mentioned this to my wife. She decided to come with me on this deal. And one of the fascinating parts about it was being in one of those mansions that was still being lived in by a family. And at one point, wandering from the attic to the basement, all on my own, without a tour guide saying, come here, go here, do this. It was just fascinating. And another time we got called to Newport to do an appraisal. Now, when I come to groups like this, or Antiques Roadshow, or All Day on the computers, we do hundreds of free appraisals. But every once in a while, someone needs a very formal written appraisal for insurance, estate taxes. Then we discuss a fee. In any case, another mansion in Newport, not quite as big as the Browns. This was the Perry family. Commodore Perry, Oliver Hazard Perry, and so on. And what they had was a whole stack of papers from the War of 1812. During the war, their family were privateers. Well, they're privateers if you're on our side. They're pirates if you're on the other side. It's all the way you look at it. But it was a day-to-day accountings of the ships. And it was amazing. They would sometimes capture a ship and realize tens of thousands of dollars profit. In 1812, that was an incredible amount of money. And then one day, one of the ships got into a battle. The ship got hit. The captain got hit. He lost his leg. A few days later, there was a tiny entry at the bottom of a page, and it said, Captain, $5 bonus, loss of leg. And that was the last you heard of the captain. So it's a little different now. Now, when my father was still alive, and he died over 30 years ago, we got a call from a lady, and she was very vague about her name and what she had, but it sounded like she might have some interesting things. And she was actually fairly close to Boston. She was in a town called Sharon. In any case, we get to her house, and it's a small ranch. Paint was peeling, weeds are growing, and you sort of say, oh, gee, what's going to be there? She answered the door. She was quite elderly. Walk into the house, and there's just gorgeous antiques everywhere. I mean, really, really beautiful antiques. And she got to talking. Turned out she was originally from the Boston area, but she had married the Prince of the Ukraine, the cousin of the Tsar of Russia. He had escaped just before the revolution. And she told story after story about being Russian nobility in Europe, all the court intrigues, how T.E. Shaw used to stay at their house all the time, how she didn't think he accidentally died on a motorcycle. And there was a lot more to it. T.E. Shaw, of course, was Lawrence of Arabia. And she went on and on and on with these wonderful stories. Turned out her books were lousy, but the stories were absolutely wonderful. And when we first got into her house, on a wall, she had 10 watercolors, probably this size, pastoral European scenes. And when I first looked at them, I thought they were nice. And the more she talked and the longer we were there and the more I looked at them, the nicer I thought they were. And I finally said to her, those are 10, they're nice. And she turned around and said, oh, yes, they're all Turners. So she had 10 original Turner watercolors, probably $1 million worth of paint. It was like, oh, yeah. So you never know the people, the places, the characters. As a matter of fact, speaking of characters, we went to one of our customers' 100th birthday parties. Now, when you go to a man's 100th birthday party, he goes, I just got back from Barcelona. I'm going to give a talk in Florida, and I've been asked to speak in Tokyo. And I finally said to him, wait a minute, you're 100 years old. Don't you think Tokyo is an awfully long way to go? And he said, well, when I used to work, it took me well over 25 hours to get to Chicago. He says, I don't think Tokyo's a whole lot further than that nowadays. And here's a man who could tell you about one day sitting down to dinner with Henry Ford and Thomas Edison. Now, he was obviously much younger, and he said he was looking forward to this dinner and all the learning and insight he was going to get from these two men. He said he got to the table a little bit early. 5 minutes later, Ford came in and sat down next to him. And about 15 minutes later, Edison came in. Now, Edison was elderly, had one of those big horns for hearing. He said the first thing, Ford turned to Edison and yelled, "My Tom, you look very good." And Edison turned to Ford and yelled, "It's the Carter's little liver pills." This man said all night long, all they did was yell about Carter's little liver pills. And he said next time he wanted to learn something, he went to the library. Now, I can go on and on and on with these stories. I'll tell one more on this type. We get hundreds of phone calls at the store, people wanting to know, do you have a book? Can you get a book? How hard is it to get the book? Does the book exist? Or what's the value? How much is it worth? And so on. And most of those questions, either I or the people I work with, we can answer off the top of our head. Some are a little more involved. Occasionally, you really have to do some research, but that can be fun too. But every once in a while, you get a call that really stands out. And again, this was quite a while ago. I answered the phone, "Hello, Brattle Bookshop, can I help you?" Lady, elderly, thick Irish brogue. And the first thing she says is, "President Kennedy slept with me." You have to admit that gets your attention. And she stopped and waited for it to sink in. And then she went on to explain that she had worked for the Kennedy family. And when he was 2 and 3 years old, he used to fall asleep in her arms. So he did sleep with her, but maybe not what you first think. And what she had was a whole series of handwritten letters from the president. Now, presidential letters of any type have value. Handwritten letters from a 20th century president are even harder to get and rare. And she wanted to get an offer. I was actually skeptical about that, but I thought she'd be fun to meet. I went to her house. She was great, wonderful stories. The letters were fabulous. I gave her what I thought was a tremendous offer, but much as I suspected, there was no way she could sell these letters. They were part of her life. I left a note behind. As far as I know, her family still has them, probably where they belong. But who knows, maybe someday. Well, and one of the things that comes up a lot of times when I'm talking, people will ask, you know, what's the most valuable thing? What's the best things you've had? And first of all, at the very end of the talk, I'll talk about what I think is my most valuable book. But I go and see thousands of things, but there are some that stand out. Some of them that we've bought, owned, and sold. Some of them that it's just appraisal. And the first couple that I'll talk about are, I got called in to do appraisals. And many times you get called by a museum, they'll need an appraisal because they're loaning something to another museum and they just need insurance. And so that happened, and I was a member of the museum, and I said, look, I'll do the appraisal for free, but I don't want to do it from your website. I don't want to do it from a copy. I want to see the original. They said, fine, make an appointment, come in. A 4-page handwritten account of Paul Revere's ride by Paul Revere. So you're sitting there holding this, and you know, if you touch something that George Washington, Jefferson, Revere, Edison, Einstein, even though I deal with this all the time, it still can send a chill up your spine. Two others that I've done appraisals on. As I said, I have a degree in chemistry, so I like science. I got called by a local college in the Boston area to come out, and they wanted me to look at some of the books. And one of the books they had was a first edition of Principia Mathematica by Isaac Newton, which is done in the 1600s, and is basically the basis for modern mathematics. That book in and of itself is worth over $1 million. But this was Isaac Newton's copy with his notes in the margins. And so I'm holding this. Now, another thing that many of you might not realize, if you ever want to see what Isaac Newton's study was like, you can, well, I don't know how open it is, but you can go to Wellesley, Massachusetts, go to Babson College, and they have Isaac Newton's study. Roger Babson was a very rich industrialist. He collected everything he could of Isaac Newton's, which included his study, and had it shipped here. So then one time my manager and I, we got called out to do an appraisal, and she was coming with me. A building like this, we were in a basement with this type of lighting, a folding table with this type of folding, a little bit bigger, and there were a few documents on the table. One was the Bill of Rights, the other was the Pilgrim Charter, and the third was a printed copy of the Declaration of Independence. It was a year later, but it was the first copy to ever have the names printed on it. Because if you think about it, if the Americans didn't win the war, everyone who signed that document was a traitor. And so it wasn't something you did. And it was printed by a woman in Baltimore. But across the top of it, in ink, it was written, "This is a true and authentic copy, John Hancock." I have to admit, I did put my little finger on each one of those. What it was the, next to the Kennedy Museum in Boston, literally in the same parking lot as the State Archives, and they have a museum, and those documents are in that museum. But at the time, they hadn't had the museum, and these were going in, and they needed some restoration. They wanted to get appraisals. I appraised it, which, how can you appraise some of that stuff? But one of the things I found fascinating, when they were getting the little bit of repair work and restoration, they were sending them to the Conservation Center in North Andover. But when they sent them, they told me that literally the state police shut down Route 93 and would not allow any traffic on it, sort of in a motorcade, because they did not want any other vehicles on the road when those documents were on the road, to the point of, and I still got to touch them, whatever. And then sometimes you can go to the opposite way. We bought a collection of over 2,000 cookbooks a while ago. And some of them really good. I mean, going back to the 1800s, some more modern, but, signed copies of Julia Child's cookbook can be valuable, or they were a lot of fun. But along with the collection of cookbooks, there was a box of these pamphlets, like King Arthur Flour, How to Make Jell-O, Baker Chocolate Company. And they're little pamphlets, a lot of them around the turn of the last century. They're very colorful. Some of them have some value, but I just said to the people working at the store with me, just put them out on the dollar table. We've got to spend the time on the rare books. And so we put them out. And about 2 or 3 hours later, this man comes running in with one of these. It's hard to describe how happy. He was beside himself. He goes, "I've been looking for this for years and years and years," and just went on. And it's only $1. And he just went on and on and on. And I finally looked at it, and the title was Coconuts in Constipation. So you never, ever know what people are going to be looking for, or what they're, or what, And it's sometimes also, too, how a collection gets started. We had a person who collected postcards, and he liked collecting postcards. And what he particularly liked was European postcards, and he would like trying to figure out where they were from. Well, if you think of it, a postcard from the 1890s, 1900, 1910, in Europe, not only did countries change, borders changed, names changed. Now, for instance, if you happen to pick up a postcard and you lived in Germany and it said Scully Square, and that's all it said, well, I live in Boston. I know where Scully Square was. But researching that as someone from another part of the world would be hard. Now, this was before the internet. Nowadays, I'm sure you could find all these places instantly. But not only did he like trying to find it, but he had one of the largest collection of travel guides, atlases, maps, histories. He had one of the best collections probably in the city of Boston of all of those, all based on trying to figure out where the postcards came from. And he, every once in a while, would make trips to Europe and specifically would want to go to these little-known spots just to do it. And so the postcards weren't terribly valuable in the sense, but it was like it led to that collection. When I was going through my father's collection, he had a box after he died. He had a box of movie stills, 8x10 movie stills. And my father liked the movies, but it's like, I didn't know he liked them that much. He had about 200 of these movie stills. And I'm going, why? And then I started looking at them. And the first one I looked at, the actor was holding a book. And then the next one, there was a library in the background. And the next one, there was a book on the table. And if you looked at these movie stills, every single one of them had a book. It might be a painting in the background that had a painting that had a picture in the book in the second painting. And a friend of his knew he had the collection, who was a good friend. I gave it to him. I still regret, in a way. I mean, it got used, but it was just, you know, you look at someone's library and what they collect and what they have, and it tells you a lot about them many times. And that can be a lot of fun, too. And again, we're getting calls all the time, people wanting to sell libraries and so on. And it's interesting how the conversations for that, and this is a part of the business that people don't always think of, is they call you, they want you to come out to the house, or they have things. Nowadays, with digital pictures, it's a little easier, but the first question we always ask is, well, how many books do you have? And the first answer is always a lot. And then the second question is, what kind of books do you have? And the answer is usually fiction and nonfiction, which is every book ever done. Now, we try to narrow that down a little. And nowadays, what we'll say is, well, if they're on shelves, just take digital pictures of the shelves. If they're in focus, that's a detail. If they're in focus, we can look at it and tell. And that can be a lot of fun. And then we go, based on that, we can a lot of times tell people what we'd pay, that we'd come out. And the one part that people don't think of is with the used bookstore. A lot of people think, I imagine it's like running a inn in Vermont, or, you know, sort of the magic of running a restaurant. What they don't think of is how physical this job is. If you buy 1,000 books in a fifth floor walk-up in 95-degree weather, you've got to move 1,000 books out of a fifth floor walk-up in 95-degree weather. As a matter of fact, a job interview at the Brattle Bookshop starts, and literally this is how it starts. Do you have any old sporting injuries, football injuries, knee injuries, back injuries, arm, so on? The next question is, do you have any allergies to dust, mold, mildew, whatever? We get through all of that, and then we go, well, where did you go to school? What's your background? Whatever. Because if you can't do the first two, it's almost impossible to work at the store. But we do go out almost every day. And one thing that does come up occasionally that can be a little bit frustrating is you have an appointment set for the morning. Someone calls up that morning or the day before and says, I have to postpone it. And, you know, you understand maybe there's a health problem, a personal problem, a family, whatever, and you reschedule. But you still had blocked out that time, and sometimes you go, oh, well, I wish I had known. We had a customer who's still a good customer of ours, a friend, and about 20 years ago, maybe 25 now, he ran into some hard times, and he needed to sell some of his books. And a lot of them were in a storage area in Cambridge, one of those storage areas. But it was actually a nice one because it had electricity in it, it had lights and power. And he called the first time and he said, well, I'm sorry, I have to postpone. So we rescheduled. He called, he postponed. We rescheduled. He called, postponed. After 4 times, I said, Russ, if you postpone again, I don't care what you have, I'm not going. The 5th time he called, and he said, I have to postpone, but it's not my fault, it's not my fault. In the storage area that he was in, the next unit next to him was owned by a lady, and it was actually a sad story because 20 years ago, her abusive husband had run out on her. He was an alcoholic in any case, and he was gone, but she had the storage area. And that night before, she was on her deathbed, and her daughter was there, and she said to her daughter, tomorrow I want you to go to my storage area. In the storage area, you'll find a freezer. In the freezer, you'll find your father. She had murdered him 20 years ago, but put him in a freezer, and it was the storage area next to my friend's. And the police were there. It was on the news. I said, okay, Russ, that's a good excuse. And every once in a while I go, is this just a story I made up? And I Google it, and it comes up, and the headline says, bizarre story. So you never know what you're going to see, what you're going to run into. And again, a lot of it, if you deal with people, that's part of it. Now, one of the things that I said, now, sometimes people ask me if I collect books. And I say no. I don't collect books, and part of the reason I don't collect books is when I was growing up, my father would bring home 5, 6, 7 books a day, do that for 30 or 40 years, and you can imagine what our house looked like. But what I do is I read a lot. I read a lot of history, Boston, books about book collecting, and then I like Stephen King and John Grisham and all of that. There's a John Grisham book called Camino Island. It's interesting. I won't get into the details. All I'll say is I actually had a long talk with John Grisham about it. He had a thief in it that I wasn't too thrilled about the way he described. But he said that he'd take me out to dinner sometime. That I've been waiting 3 or 4 years. But if I'm ever in Charlottesville, I do have his phone number. And I might just go up and knock on his door and see if I ever get my dinner. But if you ever read it, you'll understand what my issue was with it. But my wife collected books on jazz and American roots music. She had about 1,000 books on that. And she also collects signed studio photos. And her favorite signed studio photo was, it wasn't, well, she had one that U.B. Blake had signed to W.C. Handy. But the one she loved the most wasn't actually a picture of the musicians, but it was of the billing on the outside. It was Louis Armstrong, and then at the bottom it said featuring Billie Holiday. But it was inscribed to Pops Who Taught Me Everything, Billy. But we downsized. She decided that a lot of people were not going to remember who most of these musicians were. We had a customer who wanted it. She sold it. She now has a small collection of editions of Anne Frank, the first editions in Dutch and so on. And one collection, though, that I did have, and I will a little bit later, I have a reference to Anne Frank. But there are books that had very decorative cloth covers. And the reason they had decorative cloth covers, before they widely used dust jackets. Now, dust jackets, as we know them, are more World War I and after, had more to do with production than anything else. But the reason they had decorative covers on the books was if you walked into the bookstore, they figured if it caught your eye, better chance you'd buy it. And there are people who collect these decorative covers just for the decorative covers. Maybe individually they don't seem like much, but as a collection, graphically, they can be quite nice. And matter of fact, I had a collection like this myself that started off as a bit of a joke. Got a book once, it had a picture of a toilet on the cover, and the title was Flushed with Pride, The Life of Thomas Crapper, who invented the toilet. And I brought it home, I showed it to my wife, she took one look at it and said, we have to put that in the bathroom. Then I had another book, and it had a big eye staring out of the cover. The title was We Never Sleep. It was the history of the Pinkerton Detective Agency, but with a big eye staring at you, I thought, put that in the bathroom too. Now this is a little half bathroom with no shower, no steam. Next thing you knew, we built bookshelves, and now there are 300 or 400 of these Victorian-style illustrated books in the bathroom. People walk in, they're a little taken aback, loads of reading material, and one of the rules of the collection is that nothing can be valuable because every once in a while a book will fall off the shelf, and you can imagine where it ends up. But in any case, but one of the things that I do collect now, and this, you won't be able to really see this, but every one of these pages is single-spaced, and it has either a word, a sentence, a phrase on it. Every single one of these is a story. And what I could do, and I also have it on my iPhone, and I could scroll, I could put them on a wall, I could throw dots at it, and I could do the whole lecture just from the stories here. And another item that I had once that I had to look at, I just saw it. I got called to a house in Dracut, Massachusetts on the Merrimack River, a little ranch house, post-World War II, walk in, they had some nice books. On a kitchen table was sitting this big roll of paper. It was a teletype roll. It was the manuscript for On the Road. It was the original manuscript, because he did it in stream of consciousness, so he did it on a teletype so that he didn't have to take the paper out. And so I picked it up. It actually is 130 feet long. I only unrolled a few feet of it. It was too fragile to do more, but it turned out the person that I was talking with was his nephew. But I mean, I got to touch the manuscript on the road. So, you know, that's sort of where a lot of this, but I do collect stories. And so I could do the whole lecture, and I keep adding to the stories. Let me talk a little bit about Antiques Roadshow. I've done it for a little over 20 years. It's a lot of fun. I mean, why would I ever have gone to Fargo, Boise, Omaha? Just last summer, there was a show in Anchorage, so we spent 10 days in Alaska. I mean, anywhere you go in this country, I don't care where you go if you have a little bit of time, and one of the things I'm very lucky about is usually my wife comes with me, and usually when we do the show, we can go a few days early, so we actually get to see it. Anywhere in this country you go with any type of event, it's beautiful. The people are wonderful. Don't talk about politics and religion. But, you know, as long as you don't do that, it's a lot of fun and really beautiful. And the way the Antiques Roadshow works is they now do it sort of at estates and country houses and museums. It used to be convention centers. And you do appraisals in a certain one day. You literally have like 3 book appraisers next to the print appraisers, next to the poster, next to jewelry, next to whatever. And about 3,000 to 4,000 people come to a show. Each person has 2 items, so 6,000 to 8,000 items come into a show. You appraise from about 7 in the morning, sometimes till 6, 7 at night. And they tape around a little over 100 items. It makes up 3 hours of television. Now, one of the things that people don't realize about Antiques Roadshow is that we don't get paid anything. We don't get travel. We don't get hotel. We don't get meals. But they do have 8.5 million people who watch each show. So if you get something and you tape, you get a lot of good PR out of it. And there's actually no guarantee even that you're going to get on TV, because they don't, other than a few items, they don't prejudge anything, or nothing comes in early. So you're sitting there, and the ideal day for an appraiser on the Antiques Roadshow is about 8 in the morning. Someone comes in with something interesting. They don't know everything there is to know about it. And so you look at it, there's a good story. You call a producer over, the producer comes over, you explain why you want to do it, out of earshot of the guest. Then they go over and talk to the guest. Ideally, then the producer says, go on with it. You tape by 9:30, you've taped something. The rest of the day is really easy. Maybe you get a second item, but it's easy. But if it's about 4 or 5 in the afternoon and you haven't taped, there's a good chance that you've gone all the way out and you're not going to get on TV. And one show that I remember, it was in Kansas City. A man came in early in the morning, and he had a few items from Pope John Paul. They were nice, but they weren't anything really great. But it was early, and then he pulled out a few photographs. And it turned out he was the pilot that flew the Pope and his entourage around the United States in the 70s when they made the tour. And then he started telling stories about what was going on behind the scenes. And this was getting more and more interesting. And then there was one picture in particular that I'm going, oh, this is, you know, usually when you see a picture of a person with the Pope, it's very, very formal. The Pope is there in his vestments. He has his hand out. The ring is there. People kneel, kiss the ring. They get a photo taken, and that's how you see it. This was a picture of the pilot in his pilot seat, in his uniform. The Pope was in his full vestments, but he had like one leg up, reaching over the pilot's shoulder like this, signing his Bible. And I'm going, this is great. And I go to the man, I said, okay, let's see the Bible. He goes, oh, I didn't bring that. And I go, can you go get it? And it was a Saturday. He goes, no, it's in a safe deposit box. And he can't. And it was like, ah. But later in the day, I did tape something else. And it was, I remember. And there were some things that you really, a lot of stories about appraisals. One that actually, a couple worked out well, but I'll mention one. Sometimes people bring in something. And the way it works is you come in, and first of all, they give out the 3,000 tickets. They're by lottery, they're free, but sometimes they have 30,000 people apply for those 3,000 tickets. So, you know, first of all, they've sort of won by getting it. Some of the people drive hundreds of miles to get to the show. And then when you get to the show, you bring your item, you wait in a line, you go to a group of appraisers they call triage. They look at it and say, okay, you go to paintings, you go to books, you go to... Then you get to the book line, you're waiting in line again. And so anyways, they go through a lot. But once in a while, you bring in something, and this was a case where someone brought in a folk art box, and they got sent to folk art. And it was a nice box. I guess it was worth a few $100s. But the folk art appraiser looked in the bottom box, and there were a bunch of papers. And he said, well, why don't... He brought them over to me in the book and manuscripts. And there was a letter, 4-page letter at the bottom of the box that a man who was in the Civil War, he was in the hospital in Washington, writing home. Now, those type of letters are not that rare. I mean, a lot of people save them. But this was a 4-page letter saying, please write more. I hope I'm getting better. He had diarrhea and dysentery and so on, but just on and on about family things. And normally that would not be the greatest letter in the world. But it's handwritten, 4 pages. You get to the end of the letter, and in parentheses, at the end of the letter, it says, written by his friend Walt Whitman. So that whole 4 pages was all in Walt Whitman's handwriting. He volunteered during the Civil War writing letters for people either who were illiterate or too sick to be able to write. And those letters are particularly rare because if you at the time got letters from Walt Whitman, you knew that he was someone famous. Whereas if you were a soldier in the Civil War and someone, it said, you might not have had any clue who he was. So there are very few of those. And that was one of the more interesting things. But when you do all these appraisals, and 95%, or maybe even 99% of the time, people are nice and happy. And matter of fact, when I first started doing appraisals, I always thought when you tell somebody something's not worth anything, that they wouldn't be happy. And what I've learned over the years that, matter of fact, almost all those people are thrilled. You go, and you have ways of saying it nicely, but they go, great, I don't have to deal with this anymore. I can give it to the library book sale. I can give it to my grandchildren. I can read it. But you just take that whole burden off. Now, if you tell them it's worth $20,000 or more, they're also happy. But you think the other. But every once in a while, you will get somebody who just isn't happy no matter what you do. And this was at an Antiques Roadshow, and for about 2 years, my wife did appraisals at the show. I don't mind standing there 10 or 12 hours appraising, talking to people. She didn't enjoy that as much. But she was at a show, and again, I explained what people have to go through to get to the show. So even though I could probably look down the line and say, junk, 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 oh, wait a minute, I want to see that one. You don't do that because you want to give everybody a little time and be very nice. And I mean, you want to do that anyways. But this one lady came in to my wife, and she puts a book down, and she goes, I have a book signed by A. Lincoln. And my wife looks at the book and says, it is signed by A. Lincoln, but not the A. Lincoln we both want it to be. And the lady goes, in this tone, how can you tell? And my wife looks at the book, and she opens it up to the title page, and she goes, well, the first clue is this book was printed in 1911. And the lady goes, so? And my wife goes, well, I learned in school that Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in 1865. Lady slams the book shut, says, you don't know what you're talking about, and leaves. And, you know, it's interesting. Sometimes you want something to be what you want it to be so badly that nothing can convince you that it's what it is. And I find even sometimes when someone brings me an autograph or a first edition or so on, I look at it and I want it to be the right first edition or the right signature. But every once in a while I go, and you know, you don't have to know everything. I just have to know who does know it and who I can send the image to or who I can call and be friendly enough that they'll actually return my call. But it's easy to do. That's an extreme example. And what I will say is just recently I had someone on the phone who started off that they had a signed, inscribed copy of the Diary of Anne Frank. And I said, you don't. And they said that you do. And I said, they said they wanted to bring it in. I said, you don't have to bring it in. I know it's not signed by her. And no matter what I said, there was no convincing them, saying she died in a concentration camp before this book was printed. No matter what I said, and they were just upset and finally slammed the phone down on me. So, you know, but I also, again, understand that you want it to be what you want it to be. Why don't I do a few minutes of question and answer, and then I'm going to tell 2 last stories. And on question and answer, I'll repeat the question so that it comes in. But that's if anyone has a question. Anyone? No? Yes? You have? Well, the question is if I had any kind of medieval manuscript or book or whatever. Well, first of all, the first printed book was the Gutenberg Bible in 1456. And actually, I was once a question on Jeopardy that said, Appraiser Kenneth Gloss says a certain book would be worth $25 million, and the answer was Gutenberg Bible. But I've had pages of the Gutenberg Bible. Now, normally when a book, you rip a page out of a book, it's not valuable. In this case, the Gutenberg Bible pages are worth $50,000 to $100,000 for a single page. Probably a full Gutenberg Bible, if one came up now, it would go well into the hundreds of millions of dollars. So I have had those, and then I have had printed, not printed, but illuminated manuscripts where monks had done them in the 15, 14, 1300s. And usually they're in pretty good shape. First of all, they were very valuable when they first came out. I mean, it was only the very richest of people who could have those. And if you look at these beautifully illuminated manuscripts or books, if you go through someone's library, there's a famous American book that's called Tamerlane by a Bostonian. It's a little pamphlet done in the 1820s. It's by Edgar Allan Poe. It says by a Bostonian, not Edgar Allan. It's his first book. It's worth over $1 million. But if you saw it in the library and you didn't know what it was, you might throw it away or go out with the junk or give it away. If you had one of these illuminated manuscripts, you'd look at it and you might have no idea what it is, how it is, but it's beautiful. It's obviously, and you don't throw that away. So a lot of those actually got well taken care of over the years. And I have had them. We have sold them. Usually when I'm doing that type of work, I will call in a colleague and a specialist in that because a lot of them know it better than us, so we go in together on it. But yeah, again, it's like touching something that's 500 years old, 700, 800 years old, and it's still wonderful. And sometimes doing the research to figure out what it actually is can be a lot of fun too, although there's a limited amount of time you have in the research. Any other question? Yes. Okay, well, one of the last stories I'm going to give is what I consider my most valuable book. There are a few things that we've had, like I say, I mean, when you start getting to the Bill of Rights, which is worth over $1 million, or, Paul Revere's, I mean, there are huge amounts. One of the most valuable books that I've had is, it's actually not one book, it's a set of books. It's called The Indian Tribes of North America by a man named Curtis. It's about 40 volumes. There are 20 small volumes, and then there are 20 large portfolios of 700 photographs. And we had a copy of that. And first of all, usually when you see the Curtis photos in a museum, they've picked out 20 or 30, not all 700. I got to bring it home. My wife and I went through it individually. In the small volumes, they're filled with photographs also. That would be worth $1 million, $1.5 million now. I mean, it's just, it's amazing. And if you watch Antiques Roadshow this week, the Anchorage, there's a man who came in, and he actually came to me, but I couldn't do the appraisal because I was going off to do something. But I made sure that someone else got it. He had one of those smaller volumes from Alaska. And he was a man, I think, in his late 70s, early 80s. But the amazing thing about that was he knew people in the photographs. I mean, you're talking something that, was done in the teens and 20s. And then one of the photos he looked at and said, that's my mother. And then another, he said, I was born just out of the view of that photograph. And someone who can actually tell you and fill in the history is amazing. But that's probably one of the most valuable. Now, one other book that we had, first edition of The Great Gatsby, is a valuable book. It's still asked for a It's hard to get in good condition. It's almost impossible to get with a dust jacket. But we had a copy, and you look at it, and a nice, not dust jacketed copy of The Great Gatsby will sell from $3,000 to $10,000, depending on the condition of it. And this was a condition one that wasn't in good condition at all. But you open it up and it was inscribed to the greatest living poet, T.S. Eliot, sincerely F. Scott Fitzgerald. Now, in addition to that inscription, T.S. Eliot annotated every page of the book. So that now would be probably worth $500,000, but you had it and so on. I'm going to end with the last two stories, and this one sort of fits into what you're asking, but in maybe a little bit different ways. People ask me what I consider my most valuable book or so on. And actually, one thing my daughters a few years ago said to me, she goes, with all the books that you've had, all these really great things and all of the fabulous things, don't you wish you still had some of them? And I, without even a bat of an eyelash, I said, yes, so I could sell them again. I mean, it's no question about it. But the most valuable book, or the one that means the most to me, there's a 1970s copy of The Night Before Christmas. It's a nice edition, has very nice illustrations. But that copy of The Night Before Christmas, I have read to my daughters, who are now in their late 30s, every single Christmas Eve from the time they were born, and also now their children, that particular copy. And matter of fact, to the point where one of my daughters is married to somebody from Texas. And now, I think they're smart. They live in the Boston area. But a lot of times at Christmas time, they go down to his family. And before there was FaceTime, I actually recorded my reading of it on YouTube so that my daughter on Christmas Eve could have it on YouTube and wouldn't miss out. My other daughter lives in Nairobi, and she has a son. And so now on FaceTime, I read it to her and to her son. The thing is, I just have to allow like 8 or 10 hours difference. That copy of The Night Before Christmas means more to me, is more valuable to me, has more sentiment than any other book I have. Wouldn't mean anything to any. Matter of fact, it means enough to our family that my daughter in this area keeps it. She jokes, so that I can't sell it, but also so that I won't misplace it and lose it. So that is by far the most valuable copy, most meaningful. One last story, though, about books and things I've seen, and it's about the Bible. The Bible is the most commonly printed book of all time, always has been, probably always will be. We sometimes get 5 to 10 calls a week with people who have 100, 200-year-old family Bibles. They want to get a value. In almost all of those cases, I have to say to them, if this is your family Bible, it's been handed down through the generations. Sentimentally, it's priceless. Monetarily, maybe not so much. Now, if you have these big old family Bibles with beautiful leather bindings, they can sell for $100 to $300 because they make wonderful gifts for ministers, priests, divinity students. Break a class, break a binding, they lose that value. Now, sometimes in the beginning, middle, or end of those, there's family, marriages, genealogies. Those can be very valuable to local historical genealogical societies. But usually now they just want to digitally image those pages. They don't want the whole Bible. They take up a lot of room. So anyways, I got called to a large old church in Boston, well over 100-year-old church. And they wanted me in there because they had a huge library that they had just accumulated over the 100-plus years and wanted to know if they had anything valuable. I spent a day there. They actually had some valuable books. It was a lot of fun. At the end of the day, the priest said to me, could you come down the basement? There were some more books. I went down and looked at more books. And then there was a closet. Actually, it was like that, but it was probably more like a small room. And the priest opened the door, front to back, floor to ceiling, top to bottom. It was stuffed with thousands of old Bibles. And I looked at the priest. I go, what is this? And he says, well, people hate to throw away a book. They feel it's sacrilegious to throw away a Bible. And what happens when a parishioner dies and the family doesn't want the Bible? They come and they present it to the church. And he goes, what do? We very graciously accept it. We don't want to offend anybody. Then we go downstairs, open the door, put it in with the rest of them. And he goes, and we can't drive a dumpster up to the back of the church and fill it full of Bibles. That would just be terrible. So I use it as an example to say that if you want to give something to a charity, ask them if they want it first. I will say, I'm going to stay here a little while. I'll do appraisals. I don't do them individually. If you crowd around me, I'll do them as fast as I can. I do want to get home. If anybody is watching on Zoom and they want to send me pictures, call, whatever, I'm more than happy to do all of those. And I do the podcast, Brattlecast. So if you like the stories, there's over 100 of these out. I put out one every 2 weeks. And listen and then say you like them, please. And thank you very much. Thank you.